Look, as a chef, I see this all the time. You probably think you've got a pretty refined palate, right? You sprinkle a little of that warm, premium spice on your morning latte or your weekend baking, feeling like a real gourmet. Well, welcome to this explainer, where I get the distinct displeasure of bursting your bubble. Because the overwhelming majority of you are happily consuming a mass-market, liver-straining imposture. You think you're eating cinnamon? You're not. Let's just dive right into this culinary tragedy, expose the absolute scammer hiding in plain sight in your kitchen cabinet, and figure out what real quality actually looks like.
The sheer embarrassing scale of this deception is, well, it's staggering. Think about it. 90% of the market, that massive chunk dominating grocery aisles, that's common Cassia. That is the cheap knockoff currently sitting in your pantry right now. Only a tiny, pathetic 10% is true Ceylon. That's the authentic historical spice. It frankly breaks my culinary heart to see how many people blindly grab these little jars off the supermarket shelf, completely oblivious to the fact that they're paying for an entirely different, structurally inferior botanical species.
So, I've got a serious question for you. Would you throw out your absolute favorite ingredient if you knew it was a toxic knockoff? Seriously, if you found out the centerpiece of your family's secret snickerdoodle recipe was actually a totally different, industrially processed bark than what the label implies, would you keep baking with it? Or do you have the culinary integrity to purge your pantry of a cheap lie once you learn the truth? Because the reality of what you're eating, yeah, it's about to get much worse.
250 times. Just let that number sink in. That is the massive gap in a specific liver-straining compound called coumarin between true Ceylon and the common pantry trash you usually consume. Coumarin isn't just some harmless little chemical quirk you can ignore. In high doses, it's a scientifically documented toxin directly linked to liver and kidney damage. True Ceylon has almost negligible amounts of it, but your cheap Cassia? 250 times more. You're quite literally sprinkling a known toxin on your morning oatmeal simply because you don't know any better.
Because of those massive coumarin levels, health experts actually had to put a strict safety ceiling on your cheap supermarket spice. Get this, if you're eating Cassia, you really shouldn't consume more than 1/4 of a teaspoon per day. 1/4 of a teaspoon, that is barely a dusting, and that's the limit just to prevent organ damage. Meanwhile, authentic Ceylon is so profoundly low in toxins that's completely safe for daily cinnamon addicts. You want it in every latte, every baked good, every single curry, go right ahead. Your organs shouldn't have to suffer just because of terrible ingredient standards.
Okay, let's fix this. I'm going to teach you how to physically spot this lie in the wild. If you look at it up close, real Ceylon cinnamon is structurally elegant. It's made of multiple delicate, paper-thin layers of inner bark, expertly hand-rolled together so it looks exactly like a fine cigar. Now, contrast that with Cassia. It's just a single, thick, aggressively hard piece of bark that awkwardly rolls into a hollow shape, kind of like a rigid scroll. I mean, it looks rugged and cheap, because it is rugged and cheap.
And let's talk flavor. Honestly, this is where I really have to critique our absolutely ruined modern palates. We have been completely desensitized by mediocrity. True Ceylon is like the fine white wine of the spice world. It has a delicate, subtle, sweet, and almost citrusy aroma that beautifully enhances a dish without violently overpowering it. Cassia, on the other hand, it's a bold, aggressive red wine. It's pungent, it's spicy, and it actually leaves us burning aftertaste. We've become so thoroughly accustomed to the aggressive punch of the toxic version that the refined, citrusy notes of true cinnamon actually taste weak to the uneducated tongue.
It's also just a sheer historical disrespect to settle for the cheap stuff. Real cinnamon, Cinnamomum verum, comes almost exclusively from one incredibly specific place on Earth, Sri Lanka. Back in the 1500s, the Portuguese fought for it. In the 1600s, the Dutch violently took it over. In the 1700s, the British ruled it. Entire European empires spent centuries fighting bloody global wars over this exact spice because it was literally traded like gold. Yet today, people casually toss a cheap Chinese or Indonesian Cassia copy into their grocery cart without even a second thought.
So how did the cheap stuff conquer the global market? Well, genuine Ceylon requires an insane, meticulous hand-peeling labor grind. It's a 2,000-year-old artisanal craft. The thick outer bark has to be painstakingly peeled away entirely by hand, and only the most delicate inner layers are carefully harvested. Cassia, though, it's just a lazy industrial shortcut. It's incredibly easy and incredibly cheap to mass process. By the time the world realized these were completely different species, the cheaper, lazier version had already flooded every single supermarket on the planet.
Now, if you're sitting there still doubting me, let's do a little kitchen lab intervention. Try this at home. Take a tiny bit of your cinnamon powder, mix it with a drop of water, and then add a single drop of iodine. If you're actually holding true Ceylon, it'll remarkably remain a nice light brown color because it has a very low starch content. But if you have the cheap Cassia imposter, that massive starch overload reacts with the iodine and turns violently dark blue or black right before your eyes. It is undeniable physical proof that your ingredients are garbage.
So you're probably wondering, how on earth is this legal? Well, it comes down to a massive labeling glitch. The FDA doesn't actually require food brands to specify if they're selling you high-quality Ceylon or toxic Cassia. By law, both of these entirely different species can just be vaguely and lazily labeled as cinnamon. Because Cassia is the cheap industrial shortcut, it's seamlessly become the invisible default in virtually every North American grocery store. Think about it. We took a royal, delicate spice that empires fought bloody wars over. We completely replaced it with a cheap, liver-straining imposter. We let the legal system entirely blur the lines, and then we somehow convinced you to gladly bake it into your family's daily meals. And frankly, now, that's absolutely wild.